Welcome back. This is Conversation 15. We're going to go into further detail about how Bob crafted cases and sting operations with Operation Gambat. One of these cases was a fictitious law that Bob crafted to be passed by the Illinois state legislature at the hands of John DiArco Jr. Of course, it was all a setup, and Johnny DiArco Jr. fell right into the trap. Bob's going to detail how this went down. There's also a conversation about Fred Roti and how he was ensnared in Operation Gambat. Somebody the feds were determined to bring down, and Bob had access to him and was able to set the trap as well. Enjoy Conversation 15.
I left in November of 1989. There was not a single mob killing for almost 9 years, not a single one. Why? Because they could no longer be protected. We were in charge of the state's attorney's office. We were in charge of everything. Police department, the sheriffs, the attorney general. See, Pat Marcy himself didn't talk to a lot of these people. I'm talking about, about a lot of these politicians. The ones who gave him their orders and instructions was Alderman Roti, because it looked perfectly normal for them to be over there at counselors and whatever and meeting them there. Even with the Harry Alleman case, Johnny DiArco Sr. tells me Pat wants to talk to you. Pat had taken over the entire system. It would be done through Alderman Roti, but Pat was the one that gave all the orders and all the instructions. Feds were trying to go after Roti. After I had pulled that scam on Pat, indicating that I had this report, the grand jury was investigating, the only own murder. What the feds were going to do was they were going to buy a business up there in the Bridgeport area. They were going to buy a business, and then they were going to have Alderman Roti put a no parking signs up there in front of it. And that was going to be their big case to get Alderman Roti. And what had happened during that same time, my brother Bill was representing some people, some major builders there in Chicago. If you want to do anything in Chicago, any kind of a building or getting a zoning change, his clients needed a zoning change. They were going to be selling condos, but it wasn't zoned for that. So you have to go to the alderman, and the alderman then will then recommend to the city council whether it should be done or not. And he went in there to see him to get a zoning change. Roti and those people had never met any of my family. I never brought any of those people around any of the mobsters. Bill said when he went up there and he mentioned his name, Bill Cooley, and Roti said, any relation to Bob Cooley? That's my brother. And he said, have your brother talk to me. And Bill had no idea what was going on, but he mentioned, he said they have you talk to him. And I knew exactly what he meant. He's going to be looking for a bribe. So that's when I contacted the feds. And as I said, they were going to spend hundreds of thousands on a business to build a case. I've got a situation now with Fred Roti. Oh, wow, great. So when I wire up, what I wanted to do is protect Bill too. And when I wired up with Roti on the wire, I clearly said, look, Bill has no idea what's going on. I said, he's a square. I said, I'll be doing everything. I said, in fact, I told him I got a hold of the builders and, I'm going to deal with them. And I indicated to them it's going to cost something to get it done. We'll figure out what it is. After I talk to them, I'll figure out if I can, what I can get and whatever. Then I'll meet with you and we'll discuss it. Okay, great. So now this was really bizarre. I come into counselors and I've got some money. The feds gave me $2,500, to give them as a down payment. I come into counselors and I see Freddie at the table. I walk him into the back of the restaurant. There's a wall there. In the far back of the restaurant, they had, the open air kitchen. If you're walking from the counselor's row table, as you walk towards the back, there's a wall there. And then there's an areaway, a doorway, not a door, but it's like an open area where you walk right through and you go to the back. And if you go to the left, there's about 4 or 5 tables back there, but you can't see the front of it. You can't see what's going on in the front of it. And that's where I walk in with Roti. And I'm sitting there with Roti at the table. We had sat down no more than about 3 or 4 minutes. As we're sitting there, who comes walking through the areaway but Pat Marcy? And he sees me talking to Fred. As soon as he sees me, what's up? What's up, Bob? Because, I hadn't talked to him. It was like a month or so before that when I had wired up on him with the only own matter. And he said, "What's up?" Fred, he looked like a deer caught in the headlights. "Oh, well, I was going to tell you. And this is all on tape now. I was going to tell you about this. Oh, well, what is it? What's up?" And so I'm talking now with Pat. I said, "Well, I've got these builders that want a zoning change. And, oh yeah, what's it all about?" And I had no idea what it was all about. I'm just doing some gibberish. Well, they want they want to sell some condos and do some other things, and they might want to get a liquor license, in the property. And he says, "Well, find out how big a project he is, and then we'll figure out what it is." He says, "But these guys have to know everybody pays." This is Pat Marcy into the tape recorder, and they know what the rules are here. They're major builders. Who are the builders? And I didn't know. And he says, because they all know what the rules are here. And he says, "Well, we'll do all this." Then he said, "We'll do all this through Fred. I'll tell Fred, find out what the numbers are and let Fred know, and then I'll tell you what it's going to cost." That's how we got Pat into this. But Pat Marcy was the only one that I really started off wanting to get. But then as I even have Pat now, and I've got Johnny, as it turns out, I figure I've got to get the only other person who could have really probably taken control would have been Pat DeLeo. That was Johnny's brother-in-law. He was married to Johnny's sister. He was a corporation counsel. He was the head of the license court in Chicago. And I figured I've got to get him too. He could have still survived with a lot of the people that, he had been dealing with, because he was involved in the court system. And Pat was a very sharp, streetwise guy. That was the one I had mentioned to you before. I think, liked to hang around with the mobsters. He used to come into my office until I told him, to get out of there when they're there. He just liked being around them. He liked being around the bad guys and the mobsters. And most of them didn't like him at all, because he was like a wise guy type. He was one he was very vocal. He was very visible. They just never cared for him. They never liked him at all.
And so back to Marcy, when Gambat started, what did you think the timeline was to get Marcy? Did you, in your mind, think, oh, this will take a week, a month, a year, 2 years? What was the timeline by which you thought it would happen, and how long did it take to actually get him indicted?
I did not have him for a good couple of years, probably a good year and a half. They just told me, I told you before, Belucas would not let me wire up on him. And it was about a year and a half. I was at home looking through some records for some reason. And that's when I found that letter that had been sent to me, indicating that they're investigating. There's a grand jury going on, and they're investigating the Only Own case. And that's when I got the idea, because I had been told I couldn't wear a wire. That's when I got the idea. So I called Steve to start with, Steve Bowen, and I said, "Pat Marcy is expecting to talk to me." I said, "So see if you can get the okay now, to have me wear a wire." And that was how the whole thing, and so Belucas couldn't say no to that. So that's when I was told, okay, you have the okay to wear a wire on him. And that's how I was able to go after him. When I first started and they wouldn't let me, I wasn't going to stop until I found a way, and that was the way.
Those documents that you showed him were the gateway to his demise. That was the beginning of the end for him, because that's when you were able to get the wire. And were those documents real, or were those the documents that you kind of like had an old date on them and he didn't even look at?
No, they had been sent to me 3 or 4 years before that. The only target I had initially was him. Then, as I said, I didn't even think in terms of destroying the mob. I didn't initially. As I'm going along, I thought it would slow things down. It completely destroyed the mob's power. It took all their power away, because they couldn't do the things that they were doing, and no one they could get away with it.
Now, during the course of you wiring up, which was what, like 3 years' time?
Yeah, a little over 3. I think it was March of 86 until November of 89.
Do you, during this window of time, I know there were some nerve-wracking moments, especially initially when you were wearing the wire. Do you become acclimated to wiring up and it just becomes part of your routine? I know it probably wasn't daily, but did you acclimate to this and you thought it would just go on for years? Or what did you see the end of the line coming when these indictments were coming down, and were you emotionally prepared for that? Once
I had agreed to wear the wire, I assumed I would get killed. I just assumed that, because I told you before, all the contacts these people had, when When Nick the salesman was in witness protection, they found him and killed him, and I knew that. By now, I realized how powerful they had become, not just in the city, but throughout the state, but how they had contacts in the Justice Department, and they had contacts there, obviously, in witness protection. They had contacts everywhere. I never expected to survive it, and that's why I had asked Steve, and I had asked the others. I said, look, if I wind up in the trunk, the one thing I ask you, bring forward the fact that I came in voluntarily and I wasn't doing this to save my own skin, because I could just imagine the headlines as they were when I surfaced. He was into dope. He was a drug addict, and he was selling out all his friends, and so forth. Every time I had to go someplace, as I said, I started carrying 2 guns rather than 1. I assumed when I would be walking into one of these basements or opening that door, and that was why I carried 2 guns, because the snub nose, I had only had 6 bullets in it. I knew prior to that, when they had killed Tony Spilotro, I had been told there were a number of people there in the basement, beating them to death. Anytime I walked into one of these rooms, as I opened the door, what had happened one time, this is towards the end of everything now, when I have Pat Marcy, on tape, and I've got a case that I'm building up against Pat. I'm in Counselor's Row one day, and I'm supposed to make a payout. I saw Rocky and Police, who was a real nasty mobster from the Cicero crew. He was one of those that killed, Hal Smith. I saw Rocky there. He was talking with Pat Marcy, and now I got distracted. As I go back now and I see Pat in the front, I didn't see Rocky. I didn't know where Rocky had went. Rocky wasn't there in the front of the restaurant. For the first time, I see Pat, and he just motions me. Now, this is after they had found that wire there in Counselor's Row. Pat motions me to follow him. And for the first time, and he'd never done it before, he walks out of the restaurant and he walks over into the parking garage next door, and he walks into I didn't even know there's a bathroom in there. I never parked in there, so he walks into this bathroom, little shitty bathroom. Now, I'm assuming, that somebody's going to be waiting in there. And, as I'm starting to follow him, I'm obviously a nervous wreck. Right away, I'm assuming that he's setting up a trap for me. And what I'm going to do, the moment I open that door, if somebody's there, I'm going to start shooting. I've got the one gun on the left side, my snub nose. And as I open the door, I'm assuming it's going to be a trap. And here Pat walks in. There's nobody else. It's a real small little room. And he walks over to the urinal and he starts urinating. And it's a filthy bathroom. At Counselor's Row, they got a beautiful bathroom downstairs. And he just starts urinating. I'm standing by the door, and I've got my heels against the door. So in case now somebody's going to come crashing in, but nothing happens. When we walk back into Counselor's, we walk downstairs, and that's where I give him the money. I'm sure to this day that he was testing me.
What was the test?
To see if I would follow him.
And if you didn't follow him,
then they would know for sure. And I think most people in my position would have just refused to go, and would have found some reason not to. But it was something I had to do.
Were you under extreme stress in this window of time, or did you acclimate to it and just kind of adjusted day by day?
My fate was sealed. In fact, one of the reasons why, I did what I did was I felt this was my mission. This is why I wasn't killed a number of times before. I still had the Catholic upbringing that obviously came into effect. I should have been killed probably 3 or 4 times that I know of. Starting with the time when I got run over by that car, everybody thought I was dead. I should have been killed. I wasn't. I should have been killed when Ricky Burley tried to set me up, instead of paying me the money he owed me. And I knew of at least 1 or 2 other situations where I probably should have been killed and I wasn't. So, I felt this is my fate. Before I went and did anything on any of these occasions, especially when I had to go and meet Marco at the club and then go take a ride with him and whatever, I always said an act of contrition before I had that scapular medal on that my mother had made for me when I was in the hospital, years before. It's a scapular medal that says, whoever dies wearing this will not see the fires of hell. And that's what the Virgin Mary said. And I've got it. In fact, it's on to this day. I never take it off. Every time before I walked into one of these rooms or whatever, and there were a number of those occasions, I'm assuming if somebody's there, I'm going to start shooting and save a bullet for myself. I didn't worry about dying, but I worried about being tortured. I always saw visions of Butchie and what they had done to him when they took a blowtorch to him. I always worried about being tortured, but it was just it's probably hard for people to believe it.
So you're in this state of limbo, really, once you wire up. I mean, you're still trying to enjoy your life, I'm sure. You didn't stop the gambling and the carousing and living the lifestyle, but there's got to be an end in sight. The gauntlet of death is hanging over you. As you've said, you thought you would be killed at any moment, but you're seeing the light at the end of the tunnel, right? I mean, this you know that Marcy's going to get indicted. What's the thing that drives you, the wedge for you where you got to leave town? Is it the news report?
I kept trying to find new things to do so I could stay. I'm still living a fantastic life. I've got money in my pocket, I'm partying and I'm playing. And I know the moment I leave, there is no longer a Bob Cooley. I'm just some moke wandering around wherever I go. There's no life ahead of me. My law license is going to be gone. I won't be a lawyer. I'll be a nobody. I know that. And so I don't want to go. I want to keep finding new things to do. The reason I had to go is because Valukas was going to resign and wanted to take credit for what I did. That's why I had to go. And that's why when I was told you're going to have to be going within a short period of time because Valukas is going to retire, is what they told me. We're going to have to close up shop. I'm furious again because this guy who done all he can to stop me is going to get credit for all that I've done. So that was why we had the card game and all the night before. And I was going to be on the plane when it was all set up to have like 50 agents out there passing out, subpoenas to people and the rest of it. So like I said, once again, the son of a gun, look what he did to me. He ended my life. My life ended the day I got in that plane and left. Although I managed to have some pretty good times out there. After a period of time, there's some real interesting stories that went along with that. I told you about the one where I was working undercover there in Atlanta. At the same time, my trials are going on. At the same time, they got $1 million on my head with a different mob, with the hillbilly mob.
Marcy gets indicted. You're brought back in to testify.
Before we would go to trial, I would meet with FBI agents. I'd meet with a U.S. attorney that would be handling it. I worked with 4 different U.S. attorneys, 5 different U.S. attorneys. In Phoenix, we found a beautiful club out there in a huge resort. That's where we would meet, and we would go over the case. When I left town, first I was living up in Colorado, in Littleton, and they sent me all these different tapes. That was a lot of work because somebody would go over the tapes. And a lot of my tapes took place in restaurants and bars and places like that with all the background noise. And they couldn't make out half the stuff that was being said. So I was supposed to, go over them, make the changes and whatever on the tape. So there was a lot of work involved doing that because there were hundreds of tapes. We'd prepare my testimony. I would fly back in, and I would usually stay in hotels, different places up in Indiana is where we would normally go. I would be brought in each day for the court. What was real interesting was in the Harry Alleman case. When they brought me in for that, I came into northern suburbs. When I came in, I was in like a caravan. There were like 1, 2, 3 cars in front, and we had a couple of cars behind us. We had motorcycles, cops all around. What they had done was they had brought in like over 100 police and state police, and they stopped traffic. They stopped traffic on the expressway. In fact, when I went to the federal building, I always came in through the garage, never walked in the front door, came in through the FBI building. In the basement, they had a way to come. And there's another way where we would come in and not even through the driveway, and I'm not even sure where. We would come into some other garage, and there was a passageway, probably about a block and a half, 2 blocks. We'd walk through like tunnels, come back into the federal building then. Once we get into the garage, they'd take me up in the elevators that nobody else used. And I would go up to the courtroom, whatever the courtroom was, what would happen too is when they brought me in there, when Jimmy Wagner was still the supervisor, Jimmy would have me go into his office, and all the agents are spread out in a huge, outer area there with little cubicles for each of them. Everything was fantastic as long as he was there.
Let's go back to the aftermath of the failed robbery in Geneva, Wisconsin. That was the end of Bob Cooley in Chicago. You know they're going to be charged, and you're heading to the airport. Tell us what happens directly thereafter.
When I talked to Bobby and when he told me that, we got the case. And we did. We wind up convicting all of them. But what happened now, it's around 6 o'clock or so, and we head off to the Midway Airport. My 2 suitcases, and they hand me a plane ticket. And I look at the plane ticket, flying into Naples. And when I get off the plane, and I'm told that some agent will meet me there. Find yourself a motel, and when you get there, give us a call and tell us where you are, and we'll have an agent meet you there. I'm on the plane, and boy, talk about, a head job. So many things going through my head right now. My life is over. I'm leaving, flying there. I get off the plane, and I look to the right of me, and I see a sign, Marco Island over here. This is where they're sending me. Marco and those people have been buying property in Marco Island for years. They're out there all the time. And they're in Hollywood, Florida, and they're also up in that area. What the hell, I'm thinking. So I get into a cab. I go to a motel, and I turn the TV on. And when I turn the TV on, it's on Channel 9. And I see, Robert Cooley was exposed as an informant. And it turns out that he apparently was caught doing drugs or selling drugs. And he's been working with the government for a period of time, basically to save his own skin. And when I see that, I'm furious, because just a couple of days before, I had gotten the family together and just told them, I'll be leaving Chicago. I've got to go somewhere. I'll be gone for a while. And I have my mother there. I always spent a lot of time with her and was real close to her. And I'm thinking, she's at the Carmelite. She lives now in the Carmelite, old people's home. And all these people, wow, she's got a son who's a lawyer and all the rest of it. All these people are going to see that. And she's going to see that. And I'm furious. And I called John Drummond. I had his home number.
For those who don't know, John Drummond was the best investigative news reporter in Chicago for crime.
I called him at home, and I said, I'll give you a call later. I said, and just as I'm talking on the phone, the agent knocking on the door. So I said, John, I'll give you a call later. If not today, I'll give you a call in the morning, and I'll tell you the whole story. In other words, that I came on my own and all the rest of it. He goes on the newscast, and he makes the comment, I was just contacted by Bob Cooley, and he's going to recontact me and give me the story or whatever. Then I get a call from Anton Balukas. That's the first time I hear from him again since I walked out of the hotel room, which was years before. Listen, Mr. Cooley, please, he said, you really can't talk to anybody. You can't, you can't say anything. And I said, but they're totally destroying me out there. I said, my mother's watching this stuff. I said, my family's watching this stuff, and they're going to have to listen to this. Oh, no, we'll get that all straightened out. But please, if you say something that might adversely affect the cases. So I didn't call John back. so that now, as I said, I'm in a very interesting frame of mind also. Now the agent comes in, we're sitting there, and by now it seemed like 15 minutes. By now it's dark outside already. I had probably been there for about 6-7 hours, and it seemed like I'd been there for 20 minutes. And I'm talking with the agent. We decide we're going to go out to dinner. And I tell him too, I said, my God, I said, Marco Island, I said, this is where all the mob people are. They're buying properties, and they spend time all around here. We go out to his car. When we get out to his car, first he walks back into the trunk, and I'm standing next to him, and he takes off his gun and he puts his gun in the trunk and closes it. I said, what the hell are you doing? He says, I never like to wear my gun when I'm drinking. That's what he said. I don't like to wear my gun when I'm drinking. I said, then give me the fucking gun. What do you mean you don't want to wear the gun? You're supposed to be my protection here. I said, then he puts his gun back on. While I'm there, In fact, I'm talking with him. I mean, he was a nice enough guy, a real nice guy. While we're there, the next day he comes back over and he says, what are you going to do? I said, well, I guess I got to figure on something. He says, where do you want to go? And I said, I don't know. I'm trying to think of it. But, as we're talking, he mentioned he had gone to school at Colorado State University. And he says, have you thought about coming to an area like Denver? And I said, well, I used to go skiing up there, but, didn't meet that many people and not a lot. I said, maybe that's a good idea. Okay, let's go to Denver. And that's how I wound up going to Denver. And on the way there, we stopped in Iowa on the way there, and they were going to get my name changed. We flew into Iowa, and we went to a courthouse, and we talked with the judge there, and they changed my name. At that time, the FBI themselves gave me a new Social Security number. I don't know how they did it or what they did, but they gave me a new number. So I got a new name and a new number. And when we got to Denver, the same agent introduced me to a banker there who he was a friend with, and they gave me a credit card there under the new name and the rest of it to build up my credit. We traveled around, looked at a few places, and we wound up in Littleton. Steve Bowen, I think, came out there then. The very next day, Steve Bowen flew out there. As I told you before, I had a good amount of cash with me, which I didn't bother telling these people. But I had taken a very nice sum of money with me, so that wasn't going to be a problem. The very first night there, okay, I'm in my new apartment. It was about maybe a couple of days after I'd first arrived there, and I'm in my new place, and it's about maybe 1, 2 o'clock in the morning. I'm in the front room watching TV because I'm just not tired. Again, I got a lot of things going through my head. And there's a pounding on the door. Bang, bang. What the fuck? No, I don't have a gun yet. I went and bought one the next morning, but there's a pounding on the door. And at first, what the hell? Did they find me? And I'm looking around, I've got nothing to protect myself. Absolutely. I'm looking around to see if something can be used as a weapon, but there's absolutely nothing there. I had like a statue or something, a little metal thing. I grab that and I go by the front door and I look through the top part of the window, and here's this guy out there, and it looks like he's got a shotgun in his hand. And holy fuck! Then I hear, maintenance. There's a frozen pipe somewhere. We're trying to check it out, and I see a second person standing there with him. It was so cold that the pipes had frozen there. He comes in, and the guy winds up putting a hole in the wall there, trying to see if that's where the pipes were frozen. The next day, I went over to a hardware store, and at that time, you just walk in there, and I had a Colorado drive. They had already gotten me a Colorado driver's license. I go to this place, and I walk in there, and I want to buy a gun. I bought a 9mm. On that day, they had 50 agents going out serving subpoenas to people all around Chicago and Cook County. And the next day, I talked to Jimmy Wagner, and he said, Bob, the funniest thing. And I said, what's that? And he said, I was going to serve Johnny Diarco, the warrant and the subpoena. He says, I'm over in the Daily Center. As I'm walking through there, I see Johnny in the phone booth. Now, they had phone booths there at that time. Not a phone in the wall. They had a regular phone booth. He said, as I'm walking towards him, I see him suddenly just fall down to the ground. He's on the phone. He obviously called his office, any messages, and was told that somebody who just 2 days before is making a payoff to him to fix a case in the Senate. He fell straight down. He goes over and serves him, and he's laying down there in the phone booth.
Has there ever been a sting operation around a politician fixing a bill, or rather enacting a law based on a bribe? That's got to be a first.
I'm probably no doubt. In fact, I'll tell you what the thing was, and it was so silly. In fact, I've got, I saw some of the tapes afterwards. They just told me, they gave me an idea, pass a law. I don't even remember exactly how I came about thinking about it, but talked a bit about what kind of a law we're going to have them pass. We decided that a travel agency, I'm supposedly connected with some people that have travel agencies all around the country, and what they want to be able to sell insurance travel insurance. The only ones who could sell any kind of insurance like that were insurance agencies. That they wanted a special exemption so they could sell, when they're selling big packages, they could also sell travel insurance. When I'm talking to John, the way it happens is I have pretty much an idea what we're going to do, but nothing is really specific. So when I'm talking to John, I didn't expect him to ask questions, but he did. So he said, "What exactly kind of insurance do they want to sell?" What they want, they said, is they want to have business interruption insurance. What is that? And I said, well, somebody's supposed to be flying out to California because they've got a big business meeting. Say the car breaks down or they miss the plane and they miss that meeting. If you take out this travel insurance, they'll make some kind of a payoff to you for what you lost there. And I said, and another thing too was, accident insurance. And what I'm meaning is, if you're on the way to the airport or when you're leaving the airport, if you have an accident, that could be covered by this insurance, and a couple of other things. And and when Johnny's responding to me, and this is when I got the wire on, he says, if they have accident insurance, but yeah, you mean if the two planes hit each other? but
was he joking?
No, he was not joking. There were so many things where they would laugh when they would listen to these tapes with Johnny. He's so unbelievably naive in so many ways, and half listening half the time, and and whatever. But what I said was, we need to make sure that we get the law passed. And not a problem. I can do that. I said, do you need me to come down to Springfield? And he says, no. He said, no, Bob, but what you want, just tell me what you want and we'll get it done. And I said, are you sure these guys will go? If I say they'll do it, they'll do it. I had already been there with him in Springfield. So he knew that I knew too. When I told you when we became partners and he invited me to come down there with him, I went down there probably about 3 or 4 times. And everybody catered to Johnny.
How did the payoff work? Did you give him money up front initially, or it was just a...
No, first I asked what it would cost, and he comes up with a figure of $50,000. And so, okay, fine. And what I did was I paid him $5,000. I'll meet you in a couple of days. I said, well, let me talk. Let me talk to them first, and I'm sure it'll be okay. But let me talk to them first. And I made the first payment of $5,000 to him. Then I made a second. I met him again after he was supposed to make contact with these people. I said, well, make contact and make certain, John, because he was going back to Springfield in a day or two. And, when he came back, I said, can it be done? He said, well, you got to understand something, too. He was the chairman of the insurance committee down there. That was his position. He was the most powerful one down there anyhow. Anything he wanted or asked for, they would do. And because I asked him, too, now will the $50,000 cover anybody and everybody? He said, yes, not a problem. But knowing Johnny, he wouldn't have given anybody else anything. It would have all gone right into his pocket. We convicted him on that.
Did he plead or did he?
No, he went to trial first on the first case. He went to trial and he got convicted. In fact, the first thing we tried him on, I'm sure, was the Senate, and we convicted him on that. And I demanded they go after him on the other. I mean, I was furious at him. What I didn't tell you. When I left town, I told you one of the people who was my closest friend there was Bobby Whitebloom. He was the head hearing officer at the Secretary of State's office, who would do anything in the world for me. Bobby had no life except me. The only life Bobby had was me. He would never go anywhere. He would work. He had his own private practice where he represented a lot of people on license problems and all. The only time he would go out would be on Saturday nights with me. Where are you going? I'm going to Greektown. Can I meet you there? He never dated until he met me. Then he would start dating. He would start meeting girls through my dinners and the rest of it. The only time he would go out would be Saturday, and he'd come out with us. In fact, a lot of times he started doing the same thing I did too. I used to always carry a lot of money in my top shirt pocket, a big stack of bills. Maybe 4, 5, 6,000. He started doing the same thing all the time. When I left town, obviously never told him, or anybody what I was doing. But I thought I'd give him a call. I just thought I'll give him a call because I never said to Bobby, so goodbye, Bobby. And when I call, he's crying. When he hears my voice, he's crying. You're gone. what's going on? Wow. He said, well, where are you? And where are you? And I said, it's best you don't know. He said, no. He said, I'd love to come out and see you. I'd love to come out and see you, he said. And now here's a guy who's apparently he's never taken a vacation or anything. So anyhow, I agree to, and he comes out. He comes out there about a week or so later. And when he comes out, he brings me $20,000. He says, I thought you could maybe use this. He said, and whatever. And he said, and he stayed for about a week and, crying all the time because, you're gone now and whatever. And, anyhow, I said, maybe in another month or two, you come out again. And we had a real good time there. We had a real good time there. And he goes back home. And I had a SkyTel number. And I gave him my number. And he's back home. And he calls me the next day. And he's scared stiff. Bobby, what's the matter? He says, Johnny D'Arco came to see me. And he wants to know where you are. He said, he knows. He said, I know you know where he is. When you left, you must have gone to see him. And we want to know where he is or else. And I was livid. I called Steve back in Chicago, and I guess they paid Johnny a visit about 3 weeks later. And I talked to Bobby a couple of times. About 3 weeks later, I talked to Bobby, and he had a heart attack. He just had a heart attack. And I'm talking to him, and he says, I'm in the hospital. He says, I'm in the hospital, he said, and he said, I think it's, they're going to do surgery. They're going to operate, but they think it's bad. I said, Bobby, you're with good doctors. He was at Northwestern. I said, you're with good doctors, and everything will be fine. He never woke up from the surgery. He died of a heart attack. And as I said, there's no doubt in my mind that Weasel Johnny is the one that caused that. And that was why, and that was why, I demanded they do something on the second case, because he only got like about 3 years on the first one. And, so they charged him with that. They let him off anyhow, pleading guilty. And I don't think he did any extra time anyhow.
After that, Johnny D'Arco Jr. just kind of retires to Florida and
it wasn't very retired. His dad, in fact, I don't know how much money he got. His dad obviously had probably millions. His dad, treated me like the son he wishes he had, and was real coldish towards Junior. I'm just probably disgusted with the fact that, the kid never did anything other than they made him a senator and they made him this and they made him that. But I told you before how originally, he had contacted me. He saw me and wanted me to teach his son how to practice law. But Johnny Sr., when he had problems down there in Florida, he called me. I was contacted by, this is about, 15 years ago or so now, about maybe 5 or 6 years after, after I, finished with my cases. This girl made contact with me through another friend of mine who was a friend of hers. She was a lobbyist, and she was in real trouble. And she called me, and I talked to her a few times, and I helped get her out of it. I told her what she could and couldn't do, and basically got her out of it. And she became like a real close friend. When I'm talking to her, she told me that Maggie was a good friend of hers, and Maggie had just come up to visit with her. And Maggie's looking to get some kind of a job because they're broke. And I said, what's Johnny doing? And she said, he's working in a hotel with Richie. He owned a bank, a big bank, and he was with an insurance company. They owned an insurance company. Johnny was working as a desk clerk. He was working, answering the phones in his hotel down there in Hollywood. And I'm sure they lived in one of Dad's two houses. He had those two houses up there right alongside the beach where all the mob guys from all around the country used to meet. And I'm sure Johnny got that. That's why he moved to Florida. Who knows how much he was left, but it was all gone. He pissed it all away.
That concludes Conversation 15. Stay connected. Make sure you're following us. There's a few more episodes left. Thank you again for listening.